Hi, and welcome to Elevation Station, where all ideas matter. I'm your host, Oliver, and sometimes devil's advocate to my co host, Michael.
Hello, everyone out there. My name is Michael. I am by birth Iranian, born in Iran, brought up in India for many years, and now currently a Canadian citizen.
Right on. Thanks, Michael.
You're welcome.
Personally, I enjoy singing to my dog. Although, in terms of academia, psychology and sociology are my main interests. Here on Elevation Station, we plan on discussing relevant sociological topics, but as well, we will be trying to dispel the general indoctrination of negative values and norms within society. Transition will be the main topic of discussion. I believe that Michael can really take it from there.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not going to specifically describe, lay out how the transition would look like, but I'm going to kind of place a train of thought and to give an idea about how transition might look like. All this is happening so fast that yes, it can be both exciting and frightening. People who are afraid of what they don't understand find it difficult to let go of the traditional ways of doing things, and conscious creatures that fall under that category are, of course, usually frightened. And those who embrace change simply evolve and continue growing, hence, existence continues to exist. Consciousness that fall, of course, under this category find technological growth exciting. This inevitably will go head to head towards a collision course for tradition and culture. In other words, there are those who embrace progress and everything in it, and those who resist. Shift in the value system of tradition, of this tradition, if you will, usually manifests itself in a form of a revolution and an evolution. Hence you see transition and you see growth take place. What's happened is no different when humanity was faced with things like slavery, women's right, gays' right, and so on, except that it's happening faster than ever. Transition or evolution, by its nature, will always be painful. Unfortunately, there is a profound danger when a society's technological growth is changing way faster than its value system. This is simply because technology is and has always been a double edged sword. The more efficient we get in bettering our lives, the more efficient we also get in taking our lives. And this is where we all are at this point in time. We are all, whether we like it or not, we're going to be affected by this in one form or another. The question we have to ask ourselves: how likely it is that we could dodge extinction, and if we can, what attributes are needed to combat it? In conclusion, there are only outcomes that are ultimately manifested in the form of attitudes and behaviors, outcomes that are sustainable or distorted. One of the two has a future, the other doesn't. The common denominator to both these outcomes is information we possess, information that we have, or education, if you will. The more we have of it, the better chance of survival. And the lesser, of course, we possess, we become ignorant, and we know ignorant always leads to suffering. In other words, the social conditions we create for ourselves would determine the outcome of our attitudes and behaviors. How sustainable or distorted those outcomes would completely depend really on our understanding of the natural world and everything in it. And understanding, of course, something requires a method of thinking. And so what kind of method of thinking do we incorporate in our lives? The only method of thinking that we need is objective truth. And where do we get our objective truth? Look at existence, life, everything. Everything is governed by some laws of nature. Therefore, understanding it correctly really becomes to our best interest. In other words, our instructional manual should really be the laws of nature. It is the only game in town and that is objective. And applying that method of thinking in our lives and and aligning our values should really be the benchmark of all the educational system. It is where all ideas are really born. The only thing we can do right now is to ensure that we apply this method of thinking in all the educational system if we want to ensure for existence to exist and continue existing.
Well, that sounds great. There's that's given us a lot to go on. And I think that the general notion of continuing and evolving education is really what's going to be the biggest sort of impact in change and transition at large. One of the main topics that I like to talk about is, or even really propose, is implementing a standardized curriculum of social intelligence into early ages education. So something that would be akin to phys ed class. We would have a social education class where kids can learn all sorts of different things relating to sociology and psychology. For example, communication, effective communication, empathy, realizing, even just defining emotional intelligence is realizing emotions in oneself and others, and being able to react and respond to them appropriately and maturely. So that, and conflict resolution and all sorts of other things that can really make society more efficient and really provide just a better overall education and foundation for our population.
Precisely, yes.
So we were getting into objective truths also. I believe you sort of touched on that. And there are many people who would be opposed to any sort of objective truths. They would question, why are your truths, why do I have to necessarily heed your truths as objective truths? And so there's as you mentioned, there's benchmarks that we can establish, and for example, in basic math, 2 + 2 is 4. 2 + 2 will always be 4, regardless of what country you go to. It will always be 4. Things like that. The sky is blue. It contains 20.95% oxygen. There's universal truths, objective truths that we can all agree on.
And as I mentioned, yes, I sorry to cut you off there. Yes, in other words, what you're saying is that we're talking about the sky is blue and mathematics, and they're all really basically laws of nature, existence of the laws.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that's why I said the only truth that we ever need is objective truth. All our policies, everything that we do, everything that we say should be based on objective truth. It's the only game in town that we really have. And therefore, understanding the laws of nature correctly and aligning our values with that, it really becomes of a dire interest. It should be to our best interest.
Everything else just kind of seems delusional.
Yes.
If it's not aligned with something.
Well, yeah. I mean, you're diagnosing. If there's a problem, you're diagnosing the problem incorrectly. And when you diagnose a problem incorrectly, the outcome would be also wrong. So that's why I said outcomes. It can only you're either going to have distorted outcomes or you're going to have sustainable outcomes. And I went through all this rant. The reason, what I'm trying to, in a nutshell, basically trying to say is that I am positive. I'm an optimist. I know that we can we can change the world, but to do it, we have to be able to address all our problems with absolute intellectual honesty, and we have to be able to talk about these things every day. History has shown all the time that things like I mentioned, slavery, women's right, gay marriage. All these things never happened because of religion or politics or economics. They were really actually transformed because of secular dialogue and activism. And unfortunately, these have never been very easy and smooth. Transition has always been painful. And so we have to be also realistic that we can't expect transition to take place very smoothly and without any collateral damage at all. So yeah, talking about objective truth, and to do that, to be able to see things absolute objective way. Like you said, we need to have a benchmark. Our benchmark really is the laws of nature. Our instructional manual really is the laws of nature. Our Quran, our Bhagavad Gita, our Bible, or what have you. It is the only game in town. It is the only thing that's void of all opinions. It doesn't care what you think, doesn't care of your color, doesn't matter what race you have. Objective truth will only show you what is evident and what is true, what is basically true. And so incorporating that method of thinking in our educational system should really be the core of really change, because all ideas are really born through indoctrination. And indoctrination can come and it can be good or bad. I look at indoctrination, I might as well indoctrinate myself.
We're all indoctrinated.
Yes, exactly. I might as well indoctrinate myself with objective truth and get better results, because I know if I diagnose a problem correctly using objective truth, my odds, my chances of survival become so much more higher.
To a certain extent, we're all indoctrinated.
Yes, and we all are. Yes, we all are. It's either from our parents, our teachers, or society. We're profoundly shaped by our environment. And which reminds me, Link, for our listeners out there, I highly recommend to check out, I don't know if you've seen it, this documentary by Robert Sapolsky called Stress, A Portrait of a Killer.
Yeah, I have.
Yeah.
That's one of his earlier ones.
Yeah, that's right.
I believe. However, Robert Sapolsky just released, it was a talk on the evolution of behavior.
Behavior, yes.
And that, I believe, took first place position
it's a
for
great
me
talk.
personally is my most favorite talk ever.
He very clearly lays out that cause and effect being fundamental to natural law, and every neurosis from attitudes and behaviors we see is caused because of some prior causes. And prior causes that will inevitably have very predictive outcomes. So we can learn from it. Since we are creatures that learn, we can learn from the mistakes, and since everything is through trial and error. And by learning, how do we learn something? How do we understand something operates? How can we try to get someone who's suffering to feel much better? All these questions need to be addressed with absolute intellectual honesty, and we need to figure out all the problems that we have in our world. And to figure out, we have to use a method of thinking to diagnose problem correctly. What is the point of diagnosing the problem incorrectly? For example, in the olden days, if someone was frothing from the mouth, they should think that this individual was possessed by the devil, and they kill the guy. They kill the person, the individual, or burn them. Exactly. Yeah. We don't do that right now. We don't kill witches, and
they still burn them, just not physically.
Yeah, and if it's happening, it's probably happening in very, very remote part of the world. It's very rare something like this happen. My point is that our attitudes and behaviors have been updated, and we know that that person who is frothing or is his attitude and behavior is very distorted is because it's a biology gone wrong. And therefore, understanding what's gone wrong with it, we can find ways of correcting it, hence reducing suffering from that individual. Hence, existence continues to exist. So our attitude and behavior also changes accordingly. We become more empathetic, we become more sympathetic when we start to see things more objectively. Why? Because we know that your well-being and my well-being is directly related to what goes around us. Everything I say or I do towards the end of the day is going to come back to you. We know that intuitively. So to fit on the rant of objective truth. Objective truth, to have a benchmark, which should really be the laws of nature, to answer that question.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Just to play devil's advocate, you used the word should, which could be considered a cognitive distortion. Should statements. Because it's coming from a personal value. However, I mean, that, like I said, that's just playing devil's advocate. But the main idea here is to attain a consensus at large for how we behave and how structure and government and law and healthcare and all these things will be affected. And just in saying that kind of brings me back to the point that I was talking about, having a standardized curriculum of social intelligence, is that generationally you would have this widespread systematic change of people who are educated in social intelligence, and so they would just generally be more inclined to make pro-social decision making in government, in healthcare, in education, in everything. So it's something that I see is so totally viable. It could have been done yesterday.
Yeah. We have everything we need to really create an amazing and a beautiful world. We have all the resources. It is this resistance that we get from the ruling party that is really governing my life, that is all our lives. That is the traditional way I was talking about earlier of doing things is hard to let go. And otherwise we have everything we need to really change the world, and it is letting go of resources and giving freedom to people to be able to have access to the necessity of life and work together. That's why I totally believe in the open source system. Sorry, go ahead.
Ownership of information is a big barrier to that.
Yes.
That people want to keep their cultural secrets or trade secrets or what have you, because those tricks, if you will, work very well in group, and if you kind of just give them away, then they lose the value that people hold on to them for.
True.
So,
but that is changing too, also very quickly. But which brings me back to another link. Is a talk by Federico Pistono. Federico Pistono, really an awesome guy, really young individual. I highly recommend all the listeners out there to click the link below. He lays out the groundwork of how this transition is taking place in our everyday lives, and how rich people are actually coming out there and figuring out that they just do their best interest if we start sharing our resources, because they're going to eventually be affected. It's amazing. I highly recommend everyone to check out this talk. That he has a few videos, and by the way, he's written a book called Robots Will Take Your Job, But That's Okay. A very positive
robots
message.
Will steal your job?
Oh, sorry.
Okay. No, I could be wrong too.
Yeah, robots will steal your job, but that's okay. And it is, I like that because it is being positive that we could do things. Things are changing, and we can speed the process up. And again, it comes down to education. The more we educate ourselves, the more we understand how the natural world operates, the more empathetic, I believe so, the more sympathetic we become, the rate of our love, empathy, and compassion also grows much more stronger. So it really goes to the core of the education system. But I'm also not denying the fact that it is the transition, like I said, it's going to be very rosy. We are going to be faced with resistance, and it manifests always resistance in the form of a revolution. We see it. And we are going to be experiencing collateral damage. I'm pretty sure that will happen. I'm not going to be naive and say that things are going to happen smoothly. No, this will happen. We have to accept that these things are going to happen. But all we can do at this point is try to ease the pain of the transition that's taking place, and ensure that this technological growth that I was talking about earlier, which is both a double-edged sword, we don't end up cutting our own head off.
I sort of agree, and I sort of disagree with the violent revolution theory. I'm not saying that it will be comfortable. There could be, famine and poverty and police state, and those are pretty, grisly things, though it doesn't necessarily have to turn out that way.
What were you hoping? It doesn't necessarily have to turn out very bad, but do you honestly believe, in looking at history, that any transition that's taking place, that happened completely smoothly without any collateral damage?
Okay. So there's two free-floating points here that I'd like to throw out. Is that, number one, a government's main interest is its people. at the very core root, it needs its
You
people.
really believe that?
Well, I mean, hey, that's how they make money, right?
Of course, yes.
Is their people.
It's
And
very
then-
self-interest driven, yes.
so government needs to protect its people. Okay, so there's that protectionist sort of lovey fuzzy feeling that we can sort of lean on. But secondarily, there's also the consideration of how war is sort of changing, and now there's talk of how the Third World War could just be a
Precisely.
hacker war. So there's no real infrastructure damage, but
Well, we have to be prepared. I mean, we have to be prepared for the worst. We cannot assume that it will not happen, and that is dangerous. I think that way of thinking is seriously dangerous. It is because we are denying something that is a very real possibility, and we become part of the problem, not part of the solution. To become part of the solution, we really have to see the problem for what really it is, and consider the possibility that this will probably happen for sure. We have all the technology we need to really destroy ourselves more than 100 times. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, not necessarily nuclear through nuclear means. Is that let's say there's a hacker war, and the hackers shut down the power grid.
Yeah.
That's going to be just as much chaos
Absolutely.
as Russian boots on the ground.
Absolutely.
There's all these different trajectories that could very easily wind up with a police state almost overnight.
As I said, it manifests. It could it usually all the time, I should say, it manifests itself in a form of a revolution. And hacking also is a form of a revolution, like taking place in a world. I mean, all the distortion that we are seeing that's taking place is really a change, it's transition. People are fighting to try to dominate whose idea is much more viable.
Yeah, I mean, and so this is getting back to the objective truths, is
Yes.
that there needs to be this sort of, resistance that's staying balled up for what's right, and what we can all generate a consensus on.
And consensus should be not based on subjective truth, but it has to be based on objective truth.
Absolutely, and I mean, these establishing that really isn't that far-fetched. You could create something, a forum that's on the internet, and you have questions laid out for how does government work, how does authority work. But I don't want to spoil the end question.
Yeah. Like, what I want. I want to actually put this out to the listeners.
Sure.
That let us think. Let us know what you guys think. Do you agree or disagree? And do you see a possibility that we could probably dodge extinction and probably enter a world that's free of poverty, disease, and all the distortions in our world? What do you think? And let us know. And I think so. Oliver, you got here a thought experiment that you actually want to put out to the listeners and see they could do a little thinking and get their critical faculties working a bit.
Thought experiments are interesting because it's like a really big open-ended question, and so I think one of the ones that you suggested to me originally, Michael, was how would you design an ideal world? An ideal world where no poverty exists, or war, or famine. How would you design that? How would you design government and law and structure of society?
Yeah, I mean, the thought experiment provided our listeners out there, hypothetically, you had the power.
How would you do it?
How would you do it? Or it is put it even more easier. What kind of a world would you want to live in if you had a choice?
Yeah.
What kind of world would what would you do to create that world with all that's out there, with all the technology we have out there? Do a little research and be creative. There's no right and wrong answer. It is just different ways of really accomplishing peace. And so it'll be really cool to get everyone out there to actually come up with ways, creative ways. And this starts right here. We have to be creative. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I'd come up with those replicating machines you see in Star Trek. So I would have an unlimited supply of pizza wherever I go, and they would be small enough to fit in a backpack.
Yeah, for sure.
Pizza problem
Yeah,
solved.
no cooking. all changes in history, if you look at from, like I mentioned earlier, slavery, women's right, gays' right, I keep on mentioning, bringing back to this, has all taken place in our society, not really because of politics or economics or religion. It really has taken place because of what we are doing exactly right now, activism, talking about, and secular dialogue. It is really the effort of trying to really problem solve and critical think and diagnose a problem to be able to come to solutions. It is the reason why we have come so far. So I strongly believe that we do have a chance of entering a beautiful world. Yeah.
Great. Well, with that being said, I would like to thank any of the listeners for tuning in, and we should be back fairly shortly.
Yeah, sure. Looking forward to our next podcast. Hopefully, a better one.
Cool. Thanks, Michael. And just on a closing point, you mentioned how we need to talk about this.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And so the more we talk about it, basically, from my understanding in the neurobiological perspective, is that all we're really doing is reinforcing the neural pathways.
We are reinforcing, reiterating everything that we've said down here is nothing new for everyone out there.
Yeah.
We are just basically keeping on pounding in people's head over and over again.
Yeah, the thought experiment. How do you design world? Any creative questions or comments, you're totally welcome. Suggestions for future podcasts. We'll be feeding off of comments, so
please, because we are learning.
Free.
Actually, I highly encourage everyone out there to really, if anything that we've said is erroneous, is incorrect, to really correct us. This is our really first podcast, and we want to ensure that whatever information we're giving out, we're not misleading anyone or saying something that is wrong. So yeah, we need our listeners out there to help us out there too. And I know I've got to speak much more slower.
Well, that's okay. But speaking of out there, I think we can end it there. Thank you very much, Michael.
Thank you for inviting me.